Welcome to the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sue Carrick and I'm passionate about inspiring, motivating, supporting and informing women over 50 to embrace this exciting time of life. Health and wellness in mind, body and spirit are the foundations for living well, but there is so much more to a life well lived. Each week, through conversations with my guests, I'll be presenting topics that will help us all to live well and enjoy life. So join me as we discover new ways to become women living well after 50. Are you ready to start living? What are you waiting for? Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sue Carrick and it's lovely to have you join me. You've just celebrated your 25th wedding anniversary 2 weeks ago. A month ago you turned 60. You have a successful business and a relationship that you think is going strong. But what do you do when your husband says to you, "I'm seeing someone else"? My guest today is Jo Peck, author of Suddenly Single at 60, a memoir. Jo grew up in Healesville, Victoria, and worked in advertising for 35 years, co-running her own agency, Working Girls Advertising, for 20 of those years. But what did she do when her husband said to her, "I've met someone else"? That's the basis of her book, which I've read and I'm going to be discussing with Jo today. But we're going to also be talking about things like how she coped with the breakup, how she's different from before and after, and what advice she has for others going through a similar situation. So let's go and join the conversation. Welcome, Jo. It's so lovely to meet you and have you join me on the Women Living Well After 50 podcast.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honoured to be here.
Now, I was just saying before we started that I've just had a little 5-night getaway for R&R, and it was a great opportunity to read your book, Suddenly Single at 60. And before we get into that, I've given the listeners a little bit of a teaser in the introduction. But before we get into the book, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay, so I was 60 when I started writing the book. I'm now 67. I grew up in the country. Then I moved to the city when I went to university. I studied teaching, and so my first career was as a secondary teacher, which I failed dismally at, I have to say. But that led me into advertising. So most of my professional career was spent as a copywriter in advertising, and that's where I got my background in writing. So I'd been writing for 35 years, but before I wrote the book, I had never written anything long form. So the book came as a surprise to me. I never thought I had a book in me until my ex-husband, put one in me and compelled me to write.
Because you've had up until this major life change, which we're going to talk about, you had a successful business, you were going along really well. You were 60, I think you just celebrated your 60th birthday, and 25 years of marriage. And then you're in the book, I love the way you've written it because it's sort of a memoir, and it's, you start off with this big bang and then we learn more about what happened before and after. So you're getting ready to go out to buy your godson a birthday present, and your husband, or ex-husband I should say, at the time says, "I'm seeing someone else." So there's no sort of lead up or anything like that. It must have come as a shock to you.
Well, it came as a complete shock, Sue, because just to backtrack from that a bit, we were going into the city to buy a present, And I said, look, perhaps we should look at buying a new TV while we're in there. And he just hit the wall, a range of expletives, which I'll let the readers get into if they read the book. But it came out of nowhere. And then I just burst into tears and I said, uh, what's going on? And he said, what are you crying for? And I said, look, I don't know, but he said, it's only a TV. And I said, look, to me, this feels like it's about more than just a TV. It's when everything went quiet. And he said, I'm seeing someone else. Now that blew me away. I was not expecting that. I was so far from that you wouldn't believe. We were about to retire, head off on our retirement travels and adventures. And this just hit me for six. In fact, when he first said it, I had trouble processing it. I had trouble even believing what I was hearing. So yeah, it was a major, major shock.
Because as I said, 2 weeks before you'd celebrated your 25th wedding anniversary, and no hint there. You'd had a very inspiring life when you read about it, together with your travels and your cycling and those sort of adventures, which you do talk about in the book as well. So it must have just floored you. And how did you pick yourself up after that? I mean, what did you do? Obviously, you didn't go shopping that day. So,
We didn't.
so you didn't get the TV yet.
No, no, not yet. I get it later, but
Yeah.
look, how I picked myself up just immediately was
Yes.
I didn't know what to do. So we raised guide dog puppies, and our puppy was in the room with us while all this explosion was happening. So I just put the collar and the lead on the dog, and I took the dog for a walk around the streets of our neighborhood. And I was just walking on automatic. I had no idea what I was doing or where I was. And I was just trying to sort of process what I had heard. But all I could think about was that my husband is with another woman. My husband is with another woman.
Mm,
And I couldn't even kind of come to terms with that. So when I walked back inside, I decided to just ring one of my close friends and go to her place. I had no plan. I had no plan at all. I just grabbed a tote bag, put some things in it, went to her house. And, she nursed me through that first night, which was absolutely crucial. And, she said to me, at this point, your grief is 5 hours old. In the morning, it'll be 12 hours old. It'll just
mm,
get better with time. And I just thought, I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to hear about time and it getting better. I want it to not be happening.
mm,
But it was happening, so I had to deal with it. And what I did next was I went back to our house. I grabbed a few more things and I went to our best friends, which was a bit weird because we were a foursome. We were two couples who were best
mm,
friends. So I
mm,
had I had the awful issue of having to tell them what had happened. Um,
mm,
they were in as much shock and disbelief as I was. But they said, look, come here, bring everything, stay for as long as you like. And that was just like a beautiful, nurturing, welcoming place where I felt at home and where I felt like I could relax and be comfortable and, be myself because I was not in a good state, but they didn't, they let me do all my grieving in front of them.
mm,
And so I stayed there for 3 months. And during that time, I went to therapy, which really, really helped. And I started writing. So I started just putting down all my thoughts and feelings and trying to process what I was going through writing. And that
mm,
formed the basis of this book. I didn't realize
mm,
at the time that it would, but
mm,
I wanted to sort of record what I was going through, And even for the therapist, she said, just write down how you're feeling through the week and bring it to me so that I can sort of see how you're going and what are your major issues and where are you stuck. And so that's really how it started. And my friends are amazing. They were really my lifeblood. They have been all my life, but during that time, they all gathered around me and, kept me safe, kept me from, going under, really. And it was interesting that every one of our friends, without exception, and I'm not meaning this in a boastful way, but
No.
everyone came to my side.
Mm, mm.
So my ex-husband lost a lot of friends through his action.
Yes, and I suppose that's what usually happens. But but sometimes when you've got those friends that you've both been friends with for a long time, they end up going to neither side because they can't choose, and you do, that's another area where you might lose some friends because of the situation, because they don't know how to cope or what they can
Mm,
do for you.
mm. Yeah, it puts them in an awkward position as well.
Mm,
And I think that's something that, my ex-husband didn't factor in, that he actually made it very difficult for all of our friends.
mm,
And he was a little, I know he was a little upset that uh, none of them sort of came to him. I mean, they did in the beginning, but they still couldn't fathom why he had done what he had done. It didn't make
mm,
sense to them.
mm.
So he saw that as me influencing them, but what he wouldn't accept was that it was his actions that had actually kept them at arm's length.
Yeah, and sometimes he's probably thinking he's the victim in it all, even though he's the one that's caused it.
That's right.
And but also not having the courage to perhaps confide in his friends, look, I've made this decision, or, like you were the one that had to cope with telling everyone. And there's like, I think there's a certain sense sometimes of you feel embarrassed, and it's not even your fault, but you feel
Oh,
embarrassed that you have to, look, this is what's happened, and I'm not good enough. Or, they're the sort of thoughts that come into your head because obviously he's found someone else who, the cliche of finding the
mm,
younger woman.
yeah.
And it must start all these questions in our head of, we've been, you were a successful businesswoman, and yet you probably started doubting yourself. You had the self-doubts in your mind, what's wrong with me, that sort of thing.
Mm. Yeah, it felt like something that would happen to someone else, not us. I felt that we were strong enough and our life was, on a really good path. I thought we were tight, and it just didn't seem like the sort of thing that he would do. But in retrospect, when I was able to step out of that relationship and look
Mm,
at it with hindsight and look at that person for the kind of character that he is, it was actually completely, you know, in character. Because he was I don't like using the word narcissist, but he was a man who was very much in the most important person in his life was himself,
mm,
and he looked after number one at all costs. Now,
mm,
as he started to age, I think he got to a point where he felt like he wasn't as vital and as attractive as he used to be. So he went hunting for someone to bolster his ego and bolster
yeah.
his personality, and that's what happened. And I don't think it was so much. Well, in the end, I don't think it was anything to do with me. It was all more to do with him and what he was going through and what he needed for the next phase of his life. And it wasn't,
Mm.
the wife that he'd been with for 25 years.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's hard to fathom sometimes, but a couple of your friends sort of didn't say that they expected it, but they didn't expect what he did, but they'd seen signs over the years
Oh,
of
yeah.
how he was and how sort of perhaps tried to accommodate him more than vice versa and things like that.
Look, Sue, that's so true. And it wasn't just me who saw those signs or them. Everybody saw the signs, but everybody accommodated because he was that sort of personality. He was quite strong. He was the strong personality. He was an alpha male. He was charismatic. And kind of what he said went. And people were a
Mm,
little bit, he was the king of the group, if you like. And
mm,
so no one was really up to challenge him. But by the same token, I think the other reason they didn't do that was because they thought it would backfire on me.
mm,
So everyone just let that go. They let the bad behavior sort of slip under the radar. And we all just hoped for, when things would get better. And when they did get better, at
mm,
times, he was a fun person when he was in his up phase. He was
mm.
good to be with. He was, a very vibrant, charismatic man. And, everyone was willing to put up with the bad to get the good.
Mm, mm. Okay, well, we've given him enough airtime, I think.
I
So
think
let's talk about you,
yeah, yeah,
because you have, it's an inspiring book, and was feeling for you all the way through. And as I said, because when you said you were born in 1957, well, it's in the book, so they know how old we are now.
yes,
When I thought, oh, okay, we're
yeah.
born in the same year.
Mm,
And I was sort of thinking, now you've had 3 months with your friends and
yeah.
going to counselling and
Mm,
getting help. Now, that was a good step because probably a lot of women, again, feel that, oh, I don't want the stigma of having to go and find help. But that's
mm,
the time when we do need to reach out, not just to our friends, but also to professionals.
mm. I couldn't agree more, Sue. I think the worst thing you can do is retreat into your grief because then it festers. So you have to actually confront that grief. You have to take it on. You have to acknowledge it. And I think the earlier you acknowledge it, the faster you'll be able to work through it. And I found, I had already found that counsellor when I was going through menopause. So it wasn't like I had to go and find someone completely
Mm,
new. So we already had a relationship, and I walked into her office and, she said, "What's going on?" I was more than willing to sort of spit out my whole story to her. And it was such a relief. It's such a relieving thing to be able to talk to someone. And I think it's important to talk to someone who's impartial. Your friends,
mm,
they all know they know too much. A
mm,
counsellor knows nothing except what you tell them. So they're able to give you really kind of impartial advice, and they can see it from what it's doing to you and how it's impacting you.
mm,
So I would always advise anyone who's having issues or difficulties in any way in their life, any woman, to just seek out some professional help.
mm.
It's just
Yeah,
invaluable.
yeah. Well, I want to pick up on the point that you actually saw her when you were going through menopause, or
Yes.
when in menopause, and that's something that not many women do either. They either find different ways to cope or put up with things, but
Mm,
again, it's having that, well, I suppose that confidence in yourself, or the need to actually talk to someone, and overcoming those fears of, oh, well, I feel a bit embarrassed going here, because with, as you say, someone who's impartial, you
mm.
find it easier to talk to them. You find it
Oh,
easier to be yourself, don't you? Because you think, well, they're not going to judge me. They're not my friends. I probably don't have to see them after all this finishes. So, you can be more honest.
yes. And the thing with me with menopause was, um, I didn't go because I had menopause. I went to her because I thought I was going insane. I had
Mm,
no idea what was going on. I was angry, I was anxious, I was emotional, I was teary, I wasn't sleeping, but I had no idea what all that added up to.
mm,
So
mm,
I went to her just because I thought, what's happening? This is not me. So she
mm,
actually put a name to what it was, and that
mm.
was a huge relief. And I
Yeah.
find it incredible that women don't share more information about menopause and how to live
Yes.
with each other.
Mm.
Um,
I think they're starting to, but for
I
people
do
in
too.
our age group, there wasn't much back then,
No,
so you just had to sort of work your way through. And I found that GPs didn't have any idea, and if they were a male GP, that was even worse. It was almost like going back to the old days of, here, have a Bex and a good lie down or
lie down.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it has improved a bit, but there's still a long way to go. And
Oh,
I know my daughter asks me questions because she's in her mid 40s, or
mm,
almost mid 40s now, and I'm sort of honest with her and try and tell her as much as I can, because my mum had died many years ago, so I
mm.
didn't have someone to talk to. But anyway, let's get back to you. You've got yourself sort of going. And
Yes.
what I found, and it made me think, would I do this or not? But you actually felt the need that you needed to explore your sexuality, or, as a woman, and, not necessarily find a life partner, but you wanted to put yourself back out there. Why did you do that?
Good question. Um, Look, the honest answer is I think I've always been quite a sexual person. And
Mm,
so to have that aspect of my life removed, it felt big, and I wasn't ready to let that go. And
mm,
also I'm quite um I'm one of those people who likes to keep myself fit and looking good. And I
mm,
thought, well, I'm doing all this. I might as well, test whether I am still a viable, attractive woman. And,
mm,
I just sort of thought, I'm going to give it a go. I'm just going to give it a go because I first of all, I wanted to avenge what had happened to me. And
yes, of course.
I wanted I wanted the world to know that it's not just younger women who are attractive. Older
Mm,
women are attractive, and they've got quite a lot to offer over and above just, a one night stand, or, being nice and
mm,
tight, firm and fleshy in bed. There's a
mm,
lot more that we have to offer because we've lived our lives. We've found a way to understand exactly what we want and who we are. And I think
mm,
that, it gives you a confidence. So
mm,
apart from feeling physically like I could do it, I felt by this stage, I felt mentally up for the challenge. So yeah,
mm,
that's what I did. I put with the encouragement of some young people who, had got me onto familiar with the dating apps. I put myself out there, and I thought, as I say in the book, I couched it as in terms of it being an experiment, a social
mm.
experiment. So that if it failed, I could say, oh, well, that was the experiment failed. It wasn't me that failed.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I like that idea. And also putting what you wanted. You were quite, yeah, you took a little bit of time to think about uh, what is it, like a bio or something, or I
Yeah.
haven't been on them, so
No,
I'm not sure. But you sort of, the information you wanted to give, you
mm,
wanted to make sure that you were getting your point out about what you
mm,
wanted. It wasn't just about the person who saw and thought, oh yeah, she looks good, and
mm.
whichever way you swipe, I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, that goes back to what I was saying before about, you have to write a profile, and most profiles are variations on the same theme. And it's like women putting themselves on a shelf, waiting to be picked. And I thought, well,
Mm,
that's just a bit the wrong way around, isn't it? Because
mm,
this stage, I want to actually choose the person that I want to be with. So I put a little list of criteria of what I would like from my potential partner. And I just turned that on its head. Now, that was a bit of a gamble, but I listed 6 things that I wanted. And I said in my profile, you will need to have this, 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 and this, or at least 4 out of 6. Now, it was a really good ploy because it gave people a way to get in to speak to me. So some people would come back and say, oh, I'm all 6. And I would go, well, you're discounted because you've got too big an ego. But I liked the ones who said, yes, look, I'm funny and I'm active, but I'm not maybe that smart. So it was just a really good way to start that conversation and the banter. And as soon as I got into that, I loved it. I mean, it was just part of the process, which I would never have imagined I would enjoy so much, because it just meant I would be home on my own. And I didn't feel lonely because I was having conversations with people that were interesting conversations, with people from, all over the world. And be able to have that luxury or that, that privilege, I thought this is amazing. I'm really embracing this. People have had different responses and reactions to the dating apps, but for the period that I was on them, and what they delivered for me, I found them great.
And I think, well, probably you went in with a different approach, as we've talked about. And so, to a certain extent, you're a little bit more in control and it wasn't that needy, even though you wanted to, still feel that you were of value as a woman, that you
Mm.
physically and mentally, it was going to be on your terms. So going forward, that's a bit of a change to perhaps what you had before as well, where you were a bit more accommodating to keep, your partner at that time happy. This time it's, hey, this is me. I've been to hell and back. This is what I want.
Mm.
And maybe even brave enough to think, well, if it doesn't happen, so be it.
Exactly. Yeah, you're spot on there, Sue, because with with the longer I was out of that relationship, the more I realized I had compromised my personality and myself while I was in
Mm,
it.
mm,
Um, and as I rediscovered who I was and the person that I used to be, I really wanted to try and bring that person back to life. And that was not going to be a person who would allow themselves to be walked all over or, to be subsumed or, second to anybody. I wanted an equal relationship and I wanted to be valued for
mm,
what I was and who I was. So
mm,
um, I I went in, as you say, I went into that process just, feeling like I had not that I was desperate to be picked up, but that I had something to offer. So why wouldn't you give me a go?
yeah, yeah. And you had a bit of fun with it along the way. There was someone that you met. I don't want to give too much away in the
No,
book because I want people to read
no,
it, but
yeah,
like you did have different experiences, and which looking back are probably fun for you to look at, and but it just shows you what the dating game is like. And also, you hadn't really been on a date for, a long time because you'd
30
been in a
years.
long-term relationship. So, you know, it's sort of a challenge all round, really, because you've got to go to meet someone you don't really know, and then what's the dating rules for today, and that sort of thing. So, mind you, I suppose the guys felt the same way. So,
Yeah,
you're both in the same boat together.
yeah, that's
Um, yeah. Now, while this was going on, were you still working, or did you have to go back to work?
No, I was still working.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my ex-husband had retired, and I was working towards retirement, and I was going to retire when I was 60. So I was very close.
Mm,
But when this happened, um, I just couldn't let go of work because it was one of the stable um, parts of my life that I could fall back on and rely on. And it's like you said before, how do you even kind of start to negotiate life?
mm,
It's been completely upended. So I didn't want to sort of throw out my whole working life and my work colleagues and not have that purpose, because it was something that kept me grounded and gave me something to do. So I kept going for another 3 years. I kept working for
mm,
3 years. But
mm,
in those early days, I don't know how much value I was. It was interesting how I was able to kind of compartmentalize. So I would go to work, I'd walk through that door, and I'd switch on my professional person.
mm, mm,
And
mm.
then when I walked out the door, I would just fall in a heap again.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was something that got me through, a big slab of the day and gave me purpose. And, my because I had my own business with my partner, it was just a really another lovely, nurturing, wonderful place to be. So yeah,
Mm.
I really appreciated still having that to do. And then by the time I did retire 3 years later, I was really, really ready. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, it had been really a wonderful thing to just help me make that transition. The
Mm.
transformation that I had to, the necessary transformation from loss to, a new life.
Mm, mm. Because talking about loss, I mean, it wasn't just loss of the relationship, but your identity for a while, because everyone, even though you're a professional woman, they still, friends and that still see you as the couple, and that sort of thing. And also, you come to terms with, well, who am I now? What am I going to be like going forward? So there's change there. You had to
Mm.
find a new place. You left the home.
Yes.
So, rather than saying, well, okay, there's the door, pack your bags and off you go, you chose to leave. So you had to find a new nest, you know,
Yeah.
that was your little haven. But
Mhm.
also later on, and I hope I'm not overstepping the mark, but it is in the book, where even the financial distribution, because
Mm.
you were still working and
Mm.
he had retired voluntarily,
Mm.
it seemed a little bit inequitable to me. And I think a lot of women would be surprised that that's the situation they could be in.
Mm. Look, that was probably the biggest shock for me too. I always assumed that we would split our assets 50-50. And even to me, that felt unfair because I had been the major breadwinner. I was
Mm,
still, and I was really putting away a lot of money towards our travel. So it felt so galling to me to think that, I had done all that while he was, had had almost 12 months of being retired. And yet, because he had a lawyer who saw me as being, a good investment, and they tried everything to extract more from me than the 50%. And it
mm,
made me furious. Absolutely.
mm,
I just thought, like, how much more do you want me to take? You've left me for a younger woman. You at least could be fair in the settlement.
mm,
Um,
mm.
and use that to sort of assuage your guilt in some way, to say,
Yes.
okay, Joe, you did work hard. We both worked hard. It's only fair and reasonable that we split this. Now,
Mm,
that made me, if I still had some vestige of love for him, it disappeared during that process.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because also you can't turn your back on a relationship that long. But it's certainly, when I read that, I was actually very surprised. And
Yes.
I thought the same thing as you. Well, if she still held a little candle or something, it's certainly been extinguished now. So
Yeah.
let's talk about happier things. Where
Mhm.
are you at the moment? Because um, towards the end of the book, we see some success with the internet dating. And I'm not going to tell the listeners, too much, but
Mhm.
let's talk about where you're at now.
Okay, so it's a major surprise to me where I am now, because when this happened to me, Sue, I thought that is the worst thing that could possibly ever happen to me. How will I get beyond that? Now, where I am is I see that as the best thing that ever happened in my life, because it has completely transformed who I am, where I am, how I feel about myself. And I am in the happiest place I've been in for 40 years.
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
I, I'm I'm living with a new partner. I'm retired. I'm writing. I just have found someone who I can have that elusive equal relationship with, and
mm,
that's an eye opener for me every day, to think that there is that possibility out there. I'm making new friends. I'm much more confident. I have re-established my identity, and my identity is as an individual now, not as a couple.
mm-hmm,
And I feel much more comfortable and at ease and at peace with who I am than I did as my husband's wife, which I always
mm,
thought I was someone's wife. I wasn't
mm,
Jo, the individual. I was, this person's wife.
mm, mm,
And I was content to be that. But um, I I'm so grateful, really, that I've had the opportunity to reset my life, to rethink what's important to me. And
mm,
it takes a lot. It takes a lot to sort of go through the mire to get there. But I would advise anybody to, just look beyond where you are when you're at your worst, because there may be something absolutely brilliant waiting for you on the other side.
mm. I was just going to ask you about your advice for others, but I don't
Oh.
know about, like I think that we're in our well, you and I are past our mid 60s now, but to me, I don't feel that. I have done more in my 60s than ever before, and my listeners know my story. And I even started the podcast in my 60s and became a personal trainer, a group fitness instructor, all these sort of things that, when you look back to previous generations, when you were
Mm.
50, you were old. But
Yeah.
now it doesn't matter what has happened. If you can get through it, you've got that life experience, and you can really, as long as you keep your health, like you were going to yoga, you found that
Mm.
to be your way of helping as well. So
Mm.
you've kept your body, and you said you were always someone that kept fit. And I think
Yeah.
if you've got your health, your fitness, um,
Mm.
that really helps as well.
Oh, of course, of course. You really need that. And just lately I've had a bit of a brush with not being quite so well. And it does impact your life. But I think if you've got all these other things to fall back on, like
Mm,
I'm still intrinsically fit, but my legs and ankles have started to get a bit arthritic, and that
mm,
annoys me. But that's part of aging, so you have to deal with that. But I still think that, yeah, being in your 60s is not, it's not anything like getting old, or starting to slow down. For me, it's the opposite. I've just
mm.
And it sounds like it is for you too. It's an opportunity to really mine the things that you've always wanted to do, and to actually make the most of the time you've got left, I think.
Yes, yes, that's right. because it is too short. Now, before we go, I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you, Jo, and I'll be putting the links to the in the show notes of where they can find your book, which I highly recommend. But before we go, I'd just like to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests, and that is, what does being a woman living well after 50 mean to you?
Okay, so that for me, it means living authentically, living your best life and who you are and who you see yourself as, not as other people see you, not as you would want to be as someone who fits, or be what you want to be who you are, rather than, trade off to, other things. It's an opportunity, and it's a wonderful time of life to actually really go for it.
Well said, and I knew exactly what you meant. So,
Okay.
so look, it's been wonderful chatting to you, Jo. I'd love to stay in touch, and I wish you all the best. And I'm
Mhm.
sure, will there be another book, do you think?
I am already working on the next book, which
There
is
you go.
actually a follow-up to this one. So it's
Oh,
the it's
excellent.
it's the happy ending extended.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
All right then. Well, look, it's been great, and I do wish you all the best. And I'll be looking out for the new book, and perhaps you can come back and visit us when you've finished that, and we can have a chat about the happy ending extended.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it too, Sue, and I'm grateful that you found me and invited me onto your podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Well, Jo was such a delightful guest, and what she's been through over the last 7 years, but has come out through the other side. And as she said, her message is about keeping that hope alive and transforming your life from loss into something that you will thrive with, and to live your best self with. So I hope that you've enjoyed the episode with Jo. Grab a copy of Suddenly Single at 60. It's a great memoir. I found it very inspiring, and I'm sure that you and those of your friends who I'd love you to share the podcast with will enjoy the book. Jo's writing a sequel, which I'll be interested in as well. Well, that's it for this week's episode. So until next time, remember to live well, enjoy life, and most of all, be a woman living life your way. Bye for now.